Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening and a happy St. Patrick's Day to you. It's too bad our Swami Atmavidyananda is not with us. He could have greeted you with a nice Irish brogue, but if I tried it, it wouldn't be an accent. It would be more of an accident. So, but we're reading from the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda, and we are reading a section called Modern Education as it Holds in India. So we will begin about halfway through this lecture. If you're following along, it's on page 388 of Volume 3.
After what we have already considered, does the claim of science appear in any way to be valid and well-grounded? Does it not make much of a shadow? Is it not like a siren that entices the passerby with her sweet voice and false promise, only to kill them? Bliss is not to be found in small things, sings the hoary sage. While it insists upon us to believe that all bliss can be derived from a shadow, whom are we to accept it, or the sage who promises eternal life, all blissfulness and omniscience? Knowledge is power indeed, but not the knowledge of a shadow, but of reality. Moreover, we can never expect to get perfect knowledge of the universe, as it is infinite in its bulk and eternal in its duration. Whereas confined in body and mind, we are nothing better than limited individuals. Even if we get the power of knowing all about a world every second of our life, the time will never come when we shall be able to know all the worlds in the universe, for they are innumerable and hence inexhaustible. So our knowledge of the universe must always remain partial or incomplete, and such knowledge is worse than no knowledge of it. It's as good as the blind man's knowledge of the elephant. The fable. Can such a knowledge be ever desirable?
Yeah, so this reminds us of the old Plato parable of the people in the cave, that all they could see were shadows on the walls of the cave. And they thought that was reality until they were freed from their chains and able to go outside and see that there was a whole world out there that was creating these shadows. Similarly, we see this world of Maya, and in an analogy, it's like a shadow world to the knowledge of Brahman. So it's not the absolute reality that we think it is. And when you wake up to the reality of Brahman, you realize that this is more of a dream world or a shadow world that doesn't have the reality you thought it had. And of course, science, especially around the time that Swami Ramakrishnananda was giving this lecture, was still in Newtonian physics. And they thought that the clockwork universe was such that you could predict everything in the universe. Knowing all the laws of physics, you could predict, if you had enough information about the universe, you could predict where it had been, or you could figure out where it had been, and you could predict where it was going, because it just all ran like clockwork, like little billiard balls running into each other. And if you know the direction of the billiard ball and how it's going to hit the next billiard ball, you know where that billiard ball is going to go and where the one that hit it is going to go. And it was quite a shock, of course, to the physicists when they discovered that that's not the way the world works, that this world is better modeled by the theories of quantum mechanics. Notice I use the term better modeled. Who knows whether we'll come up with yet another better model. But we thought we had a great model when we had Newtonian physics. And then we discovered that that wasn't the case, and that the universe seems to be run with an uncertainty principle in it, which was quite disturbing. They didn't like that. They wanted things to be deterministic. And they discovered that things weren't deterministic, and that there was this uncertainty principle in everything that we measured. And simply the act of measuring could change the outcomes of things. So it was quite a revelation that this universe was not a clockwork universe, and that you couldn't predict everything, and you couldn't know everything. There was always going to be a degree of uncertainty in your knowledge. And so this certainly reflects that. And so science itself has come to realize that it can't know everything with certainty. Ramakrishnananda, when this lecture was given, probably had no knowledge of the results of quantum mechanics at that point. All right, so let's go on.
We have now fairly dwelt upon the false claim of science upon our attention, and found out that it has no power to give us what we really desire. Nay, on the contrary, it has a great tendency to waylay and kill us by puffing us up with false vanity caused by a few little ephemeral advantages of the flesh got through it. So we should not be proud of the education which we derive from science. But unfortunately, science has permeated every branch of learning, nay, even religion, as we have seen. Can the young votary of such an education achieve anything truly noble and grand, which will give him some real advantages in life? There's too much to expect any such thing from that. Hence, the system of education, now in vogue in our schools and colleges, is certainly very defective.
Yeah, so obviously there was an emphasis in teaching the sciences, and there still is in many situations. Certainly those of us that grew up in what we call the Sputnik generation, when the Russians got the Sputnik up in the orbit before we got things into space, there was this big push to emphasize the sciences and mathematics and so forth. And so many people were encouraged to go into the sciences, that science was the key to everything. And it certainly has done a lot for the world. There's no doubt that science has been very beneficial, but we can't be lured into a false sense of security. If you look at the history of science, it's very interesting to see how sure people were of their models of the universe, going all the way back to the ancient Greeks, and going forward through the Renaissance and through Newton and through the many scientists. And they would frequently have to change their paradigms. In fact, it's very difficult for scientists to change their paradigms, because everything, they look at the world through the eyes of the paradigm that they've been taught. And so they try to fit all of the data into that paradigm. They try to fit all of the experiments into that paradigm. They model the experiments to fit into the paradigm. So it takes true revolutionaries like an Einstein in order to break through. And of course, it happens because eventually details about the model of the universe simply cannot give us the correct information about the universe, and we have to come up with a better model. And this process is probably going to continue. I doubt if it's reached its conclusion. We're constantly looking for better models to model the universe. But you have to do that with a degree of humility. You can't get sucked into thinking that your model is the be-all and end-all, which I think is a problem even today. Even today, even though we've seen in the past how models come and go. For example, the Big Bang model is a good example. There's quite a bit of evidence that there's something fundamentally wrong with the model. And yet people that have been raised in that model will adamantly declare that we will somehow figure out how to get everything to fit into this model. This was the attitude they had 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, when they were trying to get everything to fit into Newton's model, and they couldn't do it. So, we still haven't learned in general, people in general haven't learned that you may have to switch paradigms and come up with new models to get a better understanding. And it'll always be an approximate model because, as he was pointing out, it's like a shadow world. And so we're always going to have an uncertainty about it. And so your models will always be a slightly fuzzy representation of the actual. And of course, your models can emphasize different things too. You can have a model that's very good at working in some particular area, and you just accept the fact that it's not going to be a good model in another area. But the model works, and you can work with it and use it for your advantage in particular areas. So this is the way science goes. And I think it's important for people that are in the sciences to realize that the history of science has shown that models come and go. All right, so shall we continue? Yeah.
Self-expansion should be the end and aim of true education. And that can only come when it enables us to disentangle ourselves completely from the meshes of the body. Can it be affected by committing suicide? By no means, as it increases the bondage thousandfold, being an outcome of weakness. For only those people commit suicide who've not strength and courage enough in them to face boldly all untoward circumstances. Weakness strengthens the bondage, while strength alone breaks it. What is it that binds, limits, and weakens us? Desire, and not the body which is rooted in it. If you chop the branch of a tree, many more branches will grow in its place, as long as the root is left unmolested. In the same manner, if you kill one body, many more bodies will come in its place, so long as the desire is there. So self-expansion requires the uprooting of desires. How can it be affected? Wherein are the desires themselves rooted? They have their birthplace in the senses. Hence, by controlling the senses alone, we can control desires, and in controlling the latter, again, we can get rid of them, and thus expand ourselves in all ways, so that the whole universe may form a part of us, instead of our being mere insignificant particles of it. Can we get rid of the senses by mutilating them? No, for we can only mutilate the external organs, which are merely the seats of them, they being always beyond the reach of material weapons. We require a strong desire to control our desires for seeing, touching, tasting, hearing, smelling, thinking, feeling, and willing. As a thorn is required to extricate the thorn that gets into the body and causes trouble to it, so an intense desire is necessary to extricate all those desires that have rooted themselves in the man to cause him various miseries. Says Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, and when thus one desire extricates another desires, he should throw away both of them, like the thorns.
Yeah, good analogy, yes. the big desire of trying to get rid of, desiring to get rid of your desires. So almost seems like a circular reasoning, but the analogy of the thorns is a very good one there. And also, now here again, science can sometimes help us realize that our sense organs are not really giving us the accurate information we think they are, and that our whole being is programmed to be attracted to certain things. genetically and so forth, we end up being attracted to certain things. There's an interesting experiment with I think it was a type of seabird that when it was born, it would peck at the mother's beak that had a little red dot on it. And that was the clue for the mother bird to regurgitate the food that it had gathered and feed the little chick with the regurgitated food. So the little chicks were programmed to love little red dots, and the experimenters found that if they put a stick with a little red dot on it, the birds would still peck at it. And if they put 3 little dots at it, it really pecked at it. It was just absolutely enamored by 3 little red dots. So they were programmed to love little red dots. And that's just the way it is. And so similarly with us, we're programmed to be attracted to certain things. And our sense organs go out there and find these things that we think are attractive and put in these desires. And so if you realize that this is just genetic programming that's doing this, then you have a chance of fighting it. You realize that this is just something that's been programmed into you and you don't need to follow it. You can turn that program off and follow a different path. And that's really what you have to do. Otherwise, if you just kind of go along on automatic pilot, then all of these things in the world are going to continue to seem attractive to you. So we have to turn off that automatic pilot. Now, the next section is one of these infinite paragraphs. It goes on for almost a page and a half. He's going to go back into the same story he told a few lectures earlier. He starts by saying, now this is not a very easy affair. It requires a lifelong struggle on the part of a man to bring the senses under his control. A sensible man should not allow himself to be controlled by his senses, for, like unbroken horses, they will drag him to destruction. But when he is able to bring them under his control, like broken horses, they will lead him to his destination, and instead of being his enemies, will be his true friends. This attempt to control the senses is what morality aims at. Hence, the moral path is the only path that every man should follow, so that he may reach perfection at last. Man, indeed, is the creator of his own destiny. The self is the friend to the self. The big S self is the friend of the little self. And the big self is the enemy to the little self, says Bhagavan Sri Krishna. Quote from Krishna, he who conquers his little self by means of his true self is a friend to his true self. Indeed, man lives in his self-created world. It is foolish to imagine that the world is outside and independent of him. And then he goes into the same story he went into before, where the king was diagnosed with a peculiar disease, and the cure was that if he could see the color green, that would be very curing to him. And so the more green he could bring into his life, that would be a great advantage. So being the king, of course, he took the difficult way of doing it and ordered everything in the kingdom to be painted green, and everybody had to wear green, and they had to wear green makeup and so forth. And it became quite an arduous task. But you know, if you're the king, you don't care about expenses or time or anything. You just spend whatever is needed. But then one simple-minded person came by and said, why are you going to all this trouble? You could just put on a pair of green glasses and achieve the same thing with a lot less fuss. So sometimes, you know, if you didn't have all the resources of a king, you would come up with a simple solution. But if you've got a lot of resources, you end up kind of overkill and finding an expensive solution. I think we do that in government a lot sometimes. So we're going to skip that because, again, it takes them a good page and a half to get through that. And I don't know if Atma can follow along. Yes, you've got it. Okay, so we're going to start with the paragraph this clearly illustrates.
The story clearly illustrates that every man's universe is based upon himself. And if he wants to see a pious and godly world, he should have to be pious and godly himself. Religion is self-culture, and self-culture is true education. Hence, genuine education is indissolubly connected with religion. By expanding myself, I expand the universe in which I live. Thus, doing good to the world means doing good to one's own self. Our boys are sadly wanting in this kind of education. They are perfectly satisfied with the shadow and do not care to see that, of which it is the shadow. The bare mention of wine cannot inebriate a man, and as he must have to drink the real wine if he wants to be intoxicated. So merely catching at the shadow can never give one shelter and protection, never take one beyond all miseries. The reality which is behind the shadow of the phenomenal universe must be realized before a man expects to fulfill his 3 eternal cravings mentioned before. That reality goes by the name of Purusha, Brahman, or God. As he who wants to see the potter cannot be satisfied by merely looking at the pot, and as he must have to turn his back to it and search after the potter, so he who wants to realize God must not remain satisfied by studying merely the universe. He must have to turn his back to it. And how to do that? By means of education. The study of the universe is necessary, so long as it does not point out to the student the real being behind it, who is the abode of all bliss, all knowledge, and all life. That education, whose end and aim is to lead the student to truth, saving him from the enticing effects of all false glamours, is true education.
Yes, so of course he's emphasizing that moral education is really the foundation that's important for all education. Now, we can't assume that he's thinking that we don't need to learn to read and write and do arithmetic and that science is completely unimportant. That's not really what he's saying here. It's just that you have to have a basis of a spiritual, religious education along with that in order to keep your focus in the correct direction, because people still need to make a living and so forth. So there's a certain practical side to things, but you need to keep that perspective and not get fooled by it. And I think it's even harder now than it was, say, 200 years ago. You know, you didn't have social media, you didn't have advertising, you didn't have all sorts of television and radio and magazines and billboards and so forth. And of course, the advertisers have studied psychology. In fact, the original people that founded the arts of advertising came from the discipline of psychology. They'd already studied how the brain works and how you can entice people into doing things, and they did it very well. They know how to manipulate you and how to make you feel like you really need the latest hair product or the latest deodorant or the latest mouthwash or the latest dishwashing detergent or something to make your life wonderful and beautiful. And they show all these lovely pictures of gorgeous people with beautiful smiles and so forth advertising their products, and they use famous actors that are popular, and they're endorsing the product. And so you think that this has extra weight. It's been shown that if somebody that's a known entity endorses a product, it lends weight to it. Even on the radio, they'll use the lady that does the traffic in the morning. She'll do a news or an advertising spot and advertise something, or one of the newscasters, she'll do a spot for an advertiser, because it's a familiar voice that you've gotten used to, and you feel like they're somehow imbued with some sort of extra knowledge. After all, they're giving you all the knowledge of the news or the traffic or the weather or whatever it is. and so you place your trust in them as being accurate in what they deliver to you. And so this becomes an extra motivation for you. Oh, well, so-and-so endorsed this product, and they said that they use this company to fix their roof or to get rid of their termites, and so they figure it must be a good deal. So you have to be aware of all the tricks of the advertisers. Again, you have to kind of fight fire with fire. If you know the tricks that are being used against you, you can better avoid the pitfalls and not get drawn into them. And of course now with the immense amount of data collecting that goes on when you search for products on the internet, they know what kind of products you're looking for, and then they start bombarding you with ads for similar products and try to get you to buy those. And they have these lengthy info commercials that go on about a certain product, and it's similar, very same kind of format. It's usually for some sort of new supplement of some sort, and they've got some relative that was on the verge of death, and they didn't know what to do, and can you imagine how horrible it was to go see them in this state, and blah blah blah. It's a formula. You just plug in the different the different product. It's really interesting. So and you know, a half an hour later they tell you what the product is going to be. Which is probably just like any number of any other products that you could have gotten off the shelf at the store. So once you've been dragged into those a few times, you get the trick, and then you realize, oh, this is stupid, they're just manipulating me. So, all right, well, let's read the next paragraph.
Instead of being a curse, it's a blessing to humanity if science, leaving its false coquetry, plainly confesses its utter inability to solve this infinite riddle of the universe, and asks its votaries to search for truth somewhere beyond its own jurisdiction, as science occasionally does to some fortunate individuals. It is then that science behaves like a goddess, and as such fairly claims our love and reverence. In this, its divine aspect, every man should bow down to science.
Yeah, we often personify these fields of education so that because there is a certain value in it, of course. Let's see.
So go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Much has already been said about the absolute necessity of rejecting the phenomena to realize the one truth behind, which is differently known as Purusha, Brahman, or God, although there are some apparent contradictions in the understanding of these terms. But this is more easily said than done. Nay, it is the most difficult of all the feats which a human being has to perform before he can hope to realize that much longed for eternal peace and bliss, for which he is struggling consciously or unconsciously. The senses are naturally refractory, much more the mind. As there is no royal road to success, however trifling that may be, we must continually struggle hard with intense patience and perseverance to realize the highest of all goals. Culture of the following virtues, which Bhagavan Sri Krishna mentions to Arjuna, is the only means to realize that being, who alone is worthy of being known, is absolutely necessary for this purpose. Quote, sacrifice of pride and vanity, non-injury, forbearance, simplicity, reverential service to the teacher, purify, patience, austerity, non-attachment to sensual appetites, non-egoism, consideration of the miseries of both birth, death, old age and disease, want of undue love and attachment towards one's own child, wife, and home, constant mental equipoise in weal or woe, exclusive and intense devotion towards God, love of solitude, non-attraction for the company of men, constant study of the nature of self, a clear conception of the meanings of spiritual truths. These are the means of realizing the highest ideal, and those that are contrary to these blind the man, and hence are known as ignorance.
Well, that was quite a list. And to put it all in one sentence was quite a task. So just to go on, we have the sacrifice of pride and vanity. Of course, that's easy to understand. Those are just, again, they're elements of the ego. The ego wants to be proud and of its accomplishments and to feel like it's superior to other beings. And so it engages in pride and vanity. So you have to sacrifice those. Non-injury, forbearance, simplicity. So again, these are ways, again, of realizing, of reducing your sense of ego and expanding your consciousness to include others. So you don't want to injure others because you've included them in your bigger sense of self. Forbearance, because again, you understand that they are part of you and you are part of them, and they can have faults just like you might have faults, so you're more forbearing. Simplicity, reverential service to the teacher, purity, patience. Again, to have service to the teacher is giving you something valuable. Hopefully they're giving you something valuable. And so it's natural to have a reverence for them. Purity, patience, and austerity. Purity, it just means more one-pointedness of mind, you could say. Patience and austerity, you need to have patience with yourself as well as with everybody else in order to keep going. If you don't have patience, then you're apt to give up, or you're apt to try to take shortcuts which don't work. You have to put up with a good deal of austerity because it's not going to happen instantly necessarily. Non-attachment to sensual appetites, non-egotism. So some of these are kind of repetitious. Again, we're just emphasizing things in slightly different words. Consideration of the miseries of birth, death, old age, and disease. Well, that's just, again, a reminder that the goal isn't to just keep coming back and going around in circles in this wheel of samsara, but to get off of the wheel of samsara, because it is just this continual cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And in not craving for undue love and attachment towards one's own child, spouse, and home, and so forth. Because we see many times people have to give up some of those things forcibly. Perhaps some disaster comes and takes away the home, or takes away the spouse, or takes away the child. And you have to be prepared for that. You have to be able to be loving and attentive in the moment, but realize that that moment may not last forever, and that if it ends, that you have to go on. You can't just wallow in sorrow. You have to be prepared to practice detachment if loss occurs in one's life. It's better to prepare yourself ahead of time for that, and then if it never happens, that's fine. You're that much better off. But if it does happen, you're more prepared for it. Constant mental equipoise in weal or woe. So again, just trying to be of equal-mindedness and to keep your poise regardless of whether things are going very well or very poorly. Exclusive and intense devotion toward God, love of solitude, non-attraction for the company of other people, So, many people are extroverts and they love being with people, and that's fine, but they also need to cultivate the other side of their personality, the more introverted side. And introverts need to cultivate their more extroverted side so that they can feel comfortable being in the presence of people when they are in the presence of people. But we all also have to not crave to be with people all the time, to have constant stimulation of company, because the knowledge of God is really within, and that's found in solitude, and not necessarily in the company of others. Of course, the company of holy people is always thought to be good because it reminds you of your goal, and like-minded people are all sending out those vibrations. If you're with a group of people that's very interested in meditation and spiritual topics, those vibrations will be in the atmosphere and will be in the conversation and will be uplifting. Whereas if you're in the company of people who aren't particularly interested in that, maybe all they'll talk about is their latest wine tasting trip or something of that nature, and not terribly uplifting. So, all right, let's see, did I get to the end of this infinite list here? Clear conception of the meanings of spiritual paths. These are the means of realizing the highest ideal. And those that are contrary to these blind the man, and hence are known as ignorance. We have to forgive him. He's not terribly gender friendly. Everything is man and he here, but that's just the way the English language tends to be, and he was living over 100 years ago here, so we will forgive him for that. All right, do you want to finish this paragraph?
The culture of these virtues alone is calculated to make us perfect. In old India, education was indissolubly connected with such a culture. And that is why those old students still stand as the undisputed teachers of mankind and are called by the holy appellation of rishis or sages. The downfall of modern India is due to this want of virtuous and austere practices along with the book-learned education. If our education experts awake to this degenerating defect of modern education and try to remedy it, then there is some hope of regaining the pristine glory and grandeur for which ancient India is deservedly famous throughout the world.
Yeah, and of course, we mentioned last time that the Ramakrishna schools in India are highly sought after. Just for this reason, is that they not only give a very high quality education in all the normal fields that you would expect a school to give you education in, but they also teach from this bedrock of morality and religious principles. So you get the benefit of those foundational education of character building that's so important. Really, that's what's going to last you in life. Many people end up changing careers, maybe many times in their lifetime. Some people get a career and they stay in that career for the entire working life, but other people don't, and they have to kind of reinvent themselves. And it's not just the book learning that you've gotten to train for a particular trade or an occupation that's going to be important in those cases, but it's your character that's going to be important. And of course, if you're somebody who is interviewing people for a job, that's what you want to look for. You don't want to look just for what kind of grades they got in college or what kind of work experience they had, but you want to know that you've got somebody that's honest, that cares about the company that they're working for, and that cares about the customers that they're going to be serving. If they don't care about those things, the other things are not going to be very important. If you can't trust the employee, then it's not going to be a very successful hire. I remember one time there was a a famous interview process for the stewards on an airplane. In other words, some airline was interviewing people to be stewards on the airline, and they set it up so that there was a need for them to actually help each other, because they figured the people that could help their competitors would certainly be interested in helping the passengers on the plane. So that's the kind of attitude that you need to be looking for. You need to look for people that not only care about the company, but care about your customers, because happy customers will be repeat customers, of course. And the more you have repeat customers, the better your business will be. So this is often something that's overlooked, and some companies get greedy and they tend to just look at the bottom line of profit. They're not looking to keep their employees happy, and then the employees aren't looking to keep their customers happy. They're simply looking to how many ways can they cut corners, and can we make the carton 1 ounce smaller but make it look about the same size as it was before? Can we make the picture on the cover of the packaging look bigger than the stuff that's really in there? Can we put a kind of a false curvature in the bottom of the bottle so that you don't realize you're not getting as much as you used to? All these little tricks that companies use to sell you less for the same amount of money. Quality always wins out eventually. But in the short term, many companies go for the profit line, and eventually those companies end up not doing as well. It's the ones that go for quality that really prosper. So there's a lot to be learned and followed in the realm of business. If you run a business or work for a business with an attitude of moral character and integrity, then you will be more successful and the company will be more successful. And this will carry over into all the other aspects of your life. So those are the kinds of things that are important. So we've just reached the end of our time, and we can start next time with these. There's several short little essays. Some of them are a little longer than others. But dealing with, the overall section is called The Search After Happiness, and some of the sections are called Who Am I? What is the Soul? The True Self of Man? And so forth. So a lot of fundamental ideas about the nature, our nature, and our search for happiness. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om peace, peace, peace. And we're still on the air, so. Good.